Today, I discuss understanding biodiversity. In this educational video, you will know the origins of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the risks facing the global environment landscape, and the social and economic importance of nature-based solutions. It's prudent to know about the strategic plan for biodiversity from 2011 to 2020. Gives you a very good understanding of what has happened within the biodiversity ecosystem in the previous decade. Look a peek at the global status of Aichi biodiversity goals. These are the goals decided for the last decade. There are 20 goals and we'll just look at them. The module focuses on selected financial tools and metrics, just an overlap, to achieve biodiversity goals with a brief overview of sustainable finance as an enabler. If you look at the risks, one of the major risks facing humanity is economic and social inequality. Publication also on the middle road related to this is with respect to India. If you look at globally, this is one of the major risks facing humanity. Loss of natural habitat and climate change. We keep reading about this, and loss of natural habitat is what I have biodiversity as a topic under this particular stream. Conflict and inflation. Now, inflation has become a huge topic whether you go around the world. One of the major crises which is facing either middle level countries or poor countries could be inflation, specifically food inflation, which is also pointed out in sub-Saharan region. Pandemic, as the pandemic remains a risk facing humanity. Understand the meaning of biodiversity. It's good to look at the definition given by Convention on Biological Diversity. It represents a dramatic step forward in the conservation of biological diversity, its sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. When we talk about Convention on Biological Diversity, Convention's mission is to encourage actions that lead to a sustainable future. Now, this is the prime body around the world, international legal instrument, and a call for action for global framework for biodiversity. The foundation is from the United Nations Conference on Economic and Development, the Rio Earth Summit, which took place in 1992. As of today, it's been ratified by 194 countries. The governing body of Convention on Biological Diversity is COP, a Conference of Parties. It meets every 2 years. It's the Convention on Biological Diversity, divided into three. Now, these are three major aspects: ecosystem, species, genetic resources. And if you look at the domains, there are a lot of domains, including culture, under which the Convention on Biological Diversity operates in. So if science, biotechnology, education. So if you look at the domains are very wide. I have here just taken some of the selected enablers. I've looked at all of them, trying to take an example from non-profits from Worldwide Fund for Nature to the Nature Conservancy. And you have, as a bank, BNP Paribas, you have some initiatives. So these actors plus initiatives. ICMA is driver of Sustainable Bond Principles. Iceberg Data Lab, IDL, one of the drivers of metrics for biological footprint, which we'll just touch upon today. If you look at think tanks like Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, you have Paulson Institute and Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability. Then you have European Union Business at the Rate Biodiversity. You have PRI. So there are quite a few. Now, when we look at Worldwide Fund for Nature, the Nature Conservancy is the largest environmental non-profit in the world, while Worldwide Fund for Nature dominates conservation of natural habitat. When we are looking at the various actors within this whole segment, look at policymakers, environmental advocates, corporates, financial institutions, development institutions, non-profit, even social enterprises. These are the major ones here. Areas they work in, all the actors would be in policy guidance. They review progress, set and implement a global framework on biodiversity. Now, this would be more from CBT front, but then if you look at in SG integration, that would where the banks would be coming in, PRI, measurement and data. So these are some of the things which all these actors are involved in. They advocate policies enabling conservation of natural ecosystem and sustainable development. Why do we talk about biodiversity? Why is it very important? The last decade was anyway of United Nations biodiversity decade. If you look at the natural ecosystem, it's declined by 47%. For the earliest recorded states, about 1 million species are under threat of extinction. According to IPBES, human actions have significantly altered about 75% of the land-based ecosystem and about 66% of the marine ecosystem. It's backed by a financial gap. If you look at the Biodiversity Financial Initiative, it estimates that the annual funding need should be between $150 billion to $440 billion, but only $52 billion is spent per year. This translates to a financial gap of $98 billion to $388 billion per year. Further, we have seen that World Economic Forum, if you look at World Economic Forum, has estimate that more than half of the world's GDP is exposed to the risk of nature loss. This is tremendous. It could amount to about $44 trillion. The loss of biodiversity has immense. It is a natural ecosystem imbalance and leads to a deep impact on wellness and well-being of the society. The importance of nature-based solutions is tremendous. It could lead to, according to a report, $10 trillion in business opportunity. It could create 395 million jobs by 2030. Itself is a huge amount. Lead to also 1/3 of net reductions in greenhouse gas emissions required to meet the Paris Agreement goals. Now you can see how biodiversity is interlinked to climate change. The good measures is to see the percentage of alternative and nuclear energy as a percentage of total energy. So when you're looking at clean energy, what I'm talking about is non-carbohydrate energy that does not produce carbon dioxide when generated. Includes hydropower, nuclear, geothermal, solar power, among others. You look at the figures and look at the graph for world, OECD member countries and United States of America. The value for the world has shot up. Now, if you look at figures for 2015, that's where we have the last figures. The percentage has increased to 13.35% in 2015 from 8.26% in 2010 as a percentage of total energy. This is for the world. If you look at for OECD members, the percentage in 2015 is roughly around the same, whereas for the US, it's around 11.87%. So the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 to 2020. This particular plan has laid down Aichi biodiversity targets. These are targets, so there are about 20 targets and 5 strategic goals. And a lot of these targets overlap Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals given by United Nations. When you look at Target 1, was to bring in a high awareness about the biodiversity within the society. Now, if you look at Target 1, only more than one third of the people living in biodiverse countries have high awareness of values of biodiversity and to know about steps needed for its conservation and sustainable use. Look at even the Target 1 has not been achieved. We look at, to get a better perspective, we look at the global status of Aichi biodiversity targets. Here the coverage is about 196 countries. The ratification which I showed you showed the figures of 194. There's a bit disconnect here. Data source is CBT. If you look at, and CBT's flagship publication, is they keep coming out, is Global Diversity Outlook 5. This is a very good publication and I suggest you must read it to know more about the achievements within this space. If you look at, out of 196 countries, 132 countries have not reported, which is about 67.35%. Only one country is actually exceeding target, 21, which is about 10.71% meeting target. Insufficient rate is about 30, which is about 15.31%. If you look at this chart, it does not share a very rosy picture of how Aichi biodiversity targets are performing. On less than, and further, there is not a convergence between Aichi biodiversity and national targets. So if you look at this, less than a quarter of the targets were aligned with Aichi biodiversity targets, and only 10% of the national targets will be met, and they are very similar to Aichi targets. There's a huge disconnect between the national targets and Aichi targets. Data, when you look at, it is between 2000 to 2020, this graph which I'm talking about. Now this is how in the 2 decades, what has been the increase in protected area estate. So if you look at key biodiversity targets, has gone up from 29% to 44%. Now that's where improvement has taken place. Now if you look at marine areas, it has gone from 3% to at least 7%. And if you look at the territorial, it's gone from 10% to at least 15%. As of now, we know almost 100 countries have incorporated biodiversity values into national accounting system, target 2. So these are some of the limited means or figures which I'm sharing with you. Rate of deforestation has fallen by a third, or 33% over the previous decade. So previous decade, what I'm saying is 2000 to 2010, and I'm comparing now 2011 to 2020. Now deforestation again is one of the Aichi biodiversity targets. Now, financial resources for biodiversity have doubled over the years, and in 2014, as a matter of fact, in this decade, Nagoya Protocol on Access to Genetic Resources and the Fair and Equitable Sharing of Benefits took place, which is operational at least in 87 countries. Although this signing was done in the previous decade, it is only in this decade that it has been implemented. To financial tools and metrics to achieve biodiversity goals. This is just a very generic. I have a whole publication, one webinar and a tutorial on sustainable finance. And this is just to give a very brief look. We have major actors like sovereigns, corporates, and supranational organizations like OECD, or could be multilateral banks. I'm just talking about, whenever I'm talking about sustainable bonds or thematic bonds, it's divided into green, blue, social, sustainability or SGD bonds, and now the new emerging, which is sustainability linked bonds. The difference between sustainability linked bonds and the other bonds I discussed is the green and social sustainability and SGD bonds follow a use of proceeds. They are defined by a framework, whereas sustainability linked bonds have got these indicators. These could be, you can call metrics or key performance indicators, which they tap in. And I'll have something much bigger on this particular topic. Innovations which I'm talking about is blended finance and asset-backed securities. Blended finance is not new, but in the development sector over the last decade, increased over in the last decade. Asset-backed securities still takes place more in green finance space, and the US is leading, although the pie of Europe and China also is increasing over a period of time. This does not include sustainable loans. Sustainable issuances just for 2021 is about 782 billion euros, or $893 billion. This is till 19th November 2021. Exchange rates are as of 15 Jan 2022. These figures have been got from Bloomberg and Credit Agricole. If you look at the estimates for 2022, global sustainable issuance would go to 1.2 trillion euros, which is about $1.37 trillion. The sustainability linked bonds has seen the fastest percentage increase among this segment. In 2021, they were about 10% from what was a negligible ratio the year before to 20%, expected to be 20% next year. Financial tool which will be emerging as sovereign sustainability linked bonds. There's also a report by the World Bank on this particular topic. It will be covered in the sustainability linked bonds. We are looking at metrics. It's very important to understand pressure. Pressure is multiple anthropogenic pressures that are exerted on biodiversity, causing measurable damage. Now, these are some of the measures which I've listed here. It could be also different. This is from the OECD list. Whenever I'm talking about, or whenever you're looking at climate change, it means greenhouse gas emissions. Just to show you a brief model OECD laid out in one of the workshops to identify and structure indicators. So whenever this takes, the model is basically a pressure state response model and how it relates to theory of change. So when we are talking about indicators of environmental pressure, state is indicators of environmental conditions, and response is indicators of societal response. So these are the three basic aspects of this particular model, and we are not going in detail. We'll be discussing this at a later date. We are looking at key metrics which I've talked about in one of the podcasts. Now again, I'm not going to go in detail on this. We're talking about MSA, which is mean species abundance. This could be both relative and absolute. It's on a scale of 0 to 1. 1 means you're actually comparing to the original state, that everything is intact. It basically is a measure of intactness. It's used by
corporations. So 1 would mean that everything is absolutely like in the original state, and a 0.7 would be like 30% of the original particular state. So it would be both relative and absolute. And then you have PDF, which is potentially disappeared fraction. This again is an intactness figure. Basically, you can use a regression model. This particular investments within a portfolio, asset class, or project. Again, this we are not going to in detail. This is used in financial institutions. These are just some selected metrics. Then you have STAR, which is again used in financial institutions.
A good report to read would be Finance for Biodiversity to have a more holistic view on these metrics. CBT COP15 is going to take place in Kunming, China. Post 2020, a global biodiversity framework will be adopted, and OECD has come out with its own recommendation, which follows a SMART framework. They have for spelled out the word which is more ambitious, but this is around the lines which they are, some of the recommendations are, as the middle road recommendations suggest that there should be more alignment between the national and the post 2020 global biodiversity framework.